Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP FoodSense webinar. So we like to do this webinar every Wednesday at 8 a.m. and it's part of the kind of 3 levels of commitment to the product that we give. But I'll mention that in a minute. So today is the 7th of February 2024, and as I say, we do this on a kind of weekly basis, and it's really just answering questions that have come in during the week. And I'll just basically go forward quite quickly. Now, FoodSense is about, primarily, most people are using this for the rapid testing of chilies. So it really does have sort of digitization and traceability in the supply chain. I do use the word transparency quite a lot in this webinar, but when I use that term transparency, what I mean is, even though we will give a Scoville heat unit measurement, let's say on the smart device, I mean when I say smart device, I mean either people's Android phones or their iPhones. This is not a PC-based system, which I think is a much superior thing. I mean, most people have these in their pockets. When you actually look at the hardware itself, in fact, I'll just grab it. You know, this is the kit, essentially. You know, we have a meter and we have a smartphone because it's run by an app. It has a very small footprint. It doesn't require then kind of, things like PCs. But anyway, I'll get to that shortly. But it does allow that kind of transparency because so many people get these certificates of analysis in terms of HPLC. There's even a little bit of a controversy online at the moment where people are arguing about the hotness of a particularly famous sauce and whether it's 61,000 Scoville heat units or not. And there, the evidence is HPLC. But we've also tested that sauce as well, and it's much hotter than 61,000 Scoville heat units. But I'll get to that as part of this webinar today. So as I say, I will mention this source today and also mention data behind, there is a kind of HPLC measurement on this, a certificate of analysis. The thing about these certificates of analysis is that they're mostly leap of faith is a bit strong, but you do just believe them. You have very little transparency in how that number actually came about. Now, if you want to see demo or have a much more scientific dive into this product, please come to our webinar on the 28th of February. The reason I say the scientific part is because today we may be talking about raw signal, etc., and that is something that I would be covering in the webinar. We do two, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. The reason being is the morning works out well for Asia and the afternoon works out well for the USA, for example. So please sign up for one of those webinars. Question number one today is, can I install the software on the PC? So this is really an app-driven system that the app is available either on the Google Play Store or on the Android App Store. It makes Bluetooth connection with the device and you get a result on your phone. But just out of interest, when I use the word transparency, it's because the raw data that otherwise gave you the results, Scoville heat unit, also went to the cloud as well. So there is no, let's say, PC software. These QR codes will jump up later on. I think this one is, if you scan this one off your smart device, it will take you to the Google Store. And if you, the Android one, let's say, and this one will take you to the Apple Store for iOS devices. There was a question here, what is the calibration procedure here? So the quick answer is, I'll discuss the workflow a bit, especially because question number 2 was actually quite interested in the workflow. But let me just kind of give you an example here that this is a glucose strip. You have a sensor and you have a meter. It's really similar in workflow to actually the chili sensor that we're talking about today. So in order to get a sample for this, I do have to prick my finger. So I'll just get some blood. And yeah, hopefully that's enough blood there. Yeah, there it goes. And then I'll just put the sample of blood onto the sensor. And it's just doing a countdown now. And in a minute I'll get the beeps. And it says 90 milligrams per DL, which is remarkably, most people are meant to be 90 mg per DL or 5 millimolar. And it's coming exactly at the right number, which a bit of a concern because it's probably my fasting glucose because I haven't had any breakfast this morning. But anyway, it's coming at 90 mg per DL. Now, the reason I use that is because if you look at ZP, we're ISO 13485. So we're actually certified for mostly making medical diagnostics. And in particular, IVDs, in vitro diagnostics. This is an example of an in vitro diagnostic. The reason I bring it up is because there was no calibration. So at ZP, with the chili sensor, for example, there is no calibration, and it's because actually our mindset is really about that user experience. That we want people to be able to walk up, use the machine, be done, get the result, walk away. That's what we'd like, and so that's why we've not put calibration on the machine. When if you're a diabetic and you're using a glucose strip, you'll find out that they do no calibration. And the reason that we don't do calibration is actually because we do all the calibration in the factory. It's the way we actually manufacture the glucose sensors. It's our repeatability of manufacturing means then that you don't need to calibrate in the field. So if you can manufacture these in a repeatable manner, then you can essentially qualify the batch, release them to the market, and people can use them. So we actually do that in order to ensure that the product is going to work and to ensure that there is no calibration. When people ask about calibration, it's because they're thinking about traditional lab instruments where there's a PC. And in fact, I'll talk about HPLC in a bit, which does require calibration. So this is much more of a consumer, app-driven, non-PC system, which doesn't require calibration. So let me thrust forward a little bit, and it's because really ZP is coming from a IVD blood testing kind of world where you don't need that. Question number 2. Somebody wants to understand the brief explanation of the process. The process is discussed in this webinar today. The process of sort of taking the sample, putting it on the sensor, getting a result, that is discussed. So just wait for it. I will discuss competing technologies, which is, I don't believe either of these technologies is competing. They're just alternatives. HPLC, high pressure liquid chromatography. It's probably worth saying that the FoodSense Generation 4 is actually IP protected. So that's what, that's unfortunately gives us an exclusivity for like 20 years. But HPLC, I'll discuss that, and also discuss the Scoville organoleptic testing as alternative ways of doing this. And how does your product measure up? Scoville organic leptic testing is really, nobody does it. HPLC, a lot of people do it, but it's not as accurate and precise as people would otherwise like to believe. There's a lot of belief in the certificates of analysis, but many people who rely on these certificates of analysis are actually not doing the HPLC themselves. They're doing it in third-party labs, and I'll talk about that today. So just out of interest, there's 2 competing technologies. There's the Scoville organic leptic testing, where it was invented obviously by a pharmacist, Wilbur Scoville, in 1912. And what you do here is you take a panel of people and you dilute a sample, and you ask them, can you taste the sample? And the panel of, let's say, 5 people say, no, I can't taste it. This is really a thing, by the way. So when you're asking about other ways, competing processes, this is it, let's say. You then take a panel of people, 5 people, you dilute sample, you take the first dilution, you dilute it a bit more, and you ask the 5 people, can you taste it? And one of them says, actually, I can't taste it. So now you've got a panel of 4. Then you dilute it a bit more, and you get to dilution 3, and you ask them, can you taste it? And one of them drops out, and you say, oh, okay, now I've got a panel of 3. Then you take dilution 3, dilute it a bit more to get to dilution 4. Now you've got 2 people left. So at this point, 3 of the 5 have dropped out. So 60% of the people say, at the point of dilution 4, we can no longer taste that. So what you do is you actually calculate the Scoville heat unit by taking dilution 1 times dilution 2 times dilution 3 times dilution 4, and that gives you a Scoville heat unit. So that means if we did a 10x for dilution 1, a 1 in 10 dilution, another 1 in 10 dilution, another 1 in 10 dilution, and another 1 in 10 dilution, that would give that a Scoville heat unit of 10,000. That is how the Wilbur Scoville 1912 organoleptic testing actually works. Does anyone do it? Maybe, but you can see that that it's very subjective. I would argue that there's any real accuracy on this. It's obviously also very cultural. These 5 people, you're going to pull them from the same kind of, probably the same town, the same area in some particular country. So it's extremely culturally biased, I would suggest. So nobody's really doing it, but that is an alternative, let's say. I mean, what it looks like is if you've got a Carolina Reaper, which is about 2.2 million Scoville heat units, you'd have to take 1 gram of it and dilute it in 2,200 litres, which is about 484 gallons. If you want to know what 484 gallons looks like, you would need sorry, two of these. This is a pallet, by the way. So you need 2 pallets worth of this kind of volume of water in order to dissolve 1 gram of Carolina Reaper, so that the majority of that panel agree that they can no longer taste that Carolina Reaper. It's a massive amount of water. It involves quite a few people, and then you've got to kind of dispose of this. So nobody does it, and it's sort of ridiculously large and complicated to do. So that is a way of measuring Scoville heat units. What's really happening in the world these days is actually, and I'll have a case study on this. It's a fresh case study because it's something that's kind of going on online at the moment. Is people are using HPLC, but they're not actually using it themselves. They're sending out to labs. So I'll describe an HPLC in a minute. It stands about half the height of an average sized person. It's quite a large device. This is the FoodSense. In fact, I've got one here. So you can see the relative size. The FoodSense fits in your hand. You'd be struggling to pick up an HPLC system, and I would never suggest it because it's quite a delicate instrument. I suppose it may weigh 50 kilograms, and it's expensive. So that's why you don't pick it up. And it is a scientific instrument, and it's quite sensitive. It's got a large. It's capex. It's expensive to buy, and it's opex. It's expensive to run. You need a really skilled person to run it. It uses organic solvents. It uses what we call columns for doing separation. So it's got a lot of OPEX. And what it leads to is a lot of under-testing. So in the webinar, if you come to our monthly webinar, I'll talk about this, but a lot of chili samples are very heterogeneous. So if you take a sample out of them, you can hit a low spot or a high spot in terms of concentration of capsaicin. So you can get a test result, and you think that test result is representative of the entire batch of chilies, the entire batch of sauce, or the entire batch of chili powder. But it's not. It's just a snapshot of a quite small sample relative to the total sample. But because of the expense, people can't afford to do multiple testing. So in fact, they don't understand the heterogeneity of their either their incoming material, if it's a chili or chili powder, or their outgoing material, if it's in terms of like a chili sauce. So there's a lot of under-testing. Whereas FoodSense, actually, we do a lot of testing to understand the heterogeneity of the product. It also gives you slow results. So, in fact, simply this, that you have to kind of sample, you have to package the sample, you probably have to send the sample off to a lab. You may have to, you get the results back. You may have to kind of make sure you pay that lab before you get the results back. There's a lot of manual steps and delays, and so the results are slow to come back. And it's also a black box. You have no sense of what they did. And in fact, when you look at certificate of analysis, I've got a few today. There's basically 2 methodologies that people are generally using: AOAC 1995.03 and ASTA 21.3. But you'll even find the certificates of analysis don't tell you which methods they use, and depending on which method they use, you'll actually end up with a different result. With FoodSense, it's much lower cost to both own and run. You can do lots of testing. So we can come to one of our demos. You'll see us do several tests in a very short amount of time, really short amount of time. Fast results. We get a result in about 30 seconds, and it's a transparent process. What I mean by that is, I'll show you today that there's some controversy going online at the moment about how hot a particular sauce is. The nice thing about the FoodSense is, having tested the sauce, we've actually got the raw signal. So it's transparent in terms of I can look at the raw signal and say, this is hot. And I'll argue that today. I mean, this is an HPLC. You asked me to talk about, I wouldn't call this competing technology. This is an alternative technology. I mean, it's nice because I'm stood in front of it. So I'm slightly ahead of the machine, but you can already see that it's quite a large machine. Everything you see here is actually, makes up the machine. It's got solvents. So the solvents, you've got to be licensed to handle these organic solvents. You can't just dispose of these organic solvents. These got to be taken away and incinerated. The pumps are expensive. If a pump goes, you're talking about a few $1,000s to replace it. You inject the sample into it. It takes a bit of skill. There are auto samplers, but of course anything that's automated can break down. You've got the column itself. The columns don't last forever. They're at least a couple of $100s to replace. You've got the UV detector, and then you obviously, there's a PC here next to it to record the data. And it doesn't just give you Scoville heat unit; it actually gives you raw scientific data, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. So this is the type of device that people are using when you send out a sample. This is probably what they're actually using. It's a bit of a black box because I think it's under testing. So you take a sample from a batch of samples, and your big assumption is that is homogeneous. Everything's the same in there. That's a big assumption. We've got enough data at ZP to say that's completely not true. I mean, you can look at a chili itself and actually know that you'll see it online that most of the capsaicin is actually in the placenta. But of course, when you make a chili powder or a chili sauce, or whatever, only a certain fraction of that placenta, the rest of it is flesh and oils and seeds, etc. So they are intrinsically not homogeneous samples, but everyone assumes that they are homogeneous. It goes off to the lab where they actually have to do an extraction, and they probably have to do a dilution, and then they have to do an injection. Then they actually get the chromatogram. You never see the chromatogram. So you'll see people waiving certificates of analysis or putting certificates of analysis online to back up, but you'll never see the chromatogram. So this is what's going on. They get a raw signal, and then they actually do they've done a calibration, but they don't do a calibration daily. They possibly do a calibration weekly or maybe monthly, because doing a calibration of their system is actually, it's quite expensive and laborious in its own right. But actually, they take the raw signal, they compare it against the calibration, then they give you the certificate of analysis. But you've no vision on actually what that raw signal really looked like, when did they last do calibration, and what did that calibration look like as well. So it's expensive to do, it's not transparent. And if you sent the same sample to different labs, absolutely guarantee you that you will get different results. I was talking to quite a professional guy the other day, and he spent probably 2 decades kind of refining the HPLC. By the way, he does own one of these because he sees the benefit of it. But he spent a good couple of decades kind of really honing all the labs around him so that he could believe in their HPLC results. But he really put a lot of effort into that. And it still doesn't stop him from buying one of these. So HPLC, if you send to 3 different labs, you will definitely get 3 different results. That's the first thing to say. So, about HPLC. I'd also say that if you sent the same sample to the same lab on 3 different occasions and give it 3 different labels, because you need to blind the lab so that they don't understand that you're necessarily sending them the same sample. Same lab, same sample, 3 different occasions with 3 different labels, you'll get 3 different results. It's absolutely guaranteed. So you're asking what the competing or alternative technologies are, because I don't think there is competing technology because of the patent situation, but alternatives are organoleptic testing by Scoville, 1912. Nobody does it. It's really expensive. On that hotter stuff, you're talking huge volumes of dilution, and HPLC, which is a lot less reliable than people actually would like to believe. There's a bit of a controversy going on online as well at the moment. So this is Tabasco, Death Tax, and Hot Ones Experience. I'm only using these images really just as a way of education. If you look it up on Wiki, and we've done a lot of testing, you'll find that Tabasco is, in the grand world of things, it's quite a mild source. It's 2.5 to 5,000 Scoville heat units, and we've measured it, and we do a 1 in 10 dilution when we're measuring it. If you want to understand why we do a 1 in 10 dilution, come to that webinar at the end of February. Just know that we do a webinar every month as well. So if you're watching this much later on, don't worry, there is always a webinar. Just reach out to us. There's a contact us at the end of this anyway. But that said, we would do a dilution and we would get a result. And I'll talk about the results in a minute. By the way, when we test this, we always get between 2.5 and 5,000 Scoville heat units, depending on the bottle that we're using. We've also tested Death Tax as well, which states is 21,000, or let's say 22,000 if I just round it up slightly, Scoville heat units. And they do have a certificate of analysis for this. Now, what's interesting is the certificate of analysis, it's no disrespect to Death Tax. It's these people it's an artisan source, that they're trying to go for taste and flavor and the experience and the smell, so these, they're not trying to be the world's hottest sauce. They're trying to be some heat and some taste, and that we completely respect. But this is a typical one that actually, the Scoville, the certificate of analysis is like, at the moment it's 2024. The certificate analysis on the website is 2022. People under test because actually it's really expensive to do. So, so some of these certificates of analysis are quite expired, let's say. But completely decent source, absolutely no issues with it. But anyway, that said, we've tested it. There we did a 1 in 100 dilution. Again, if you want to understand why we use these different dilutions, come to that webinar at the end of the month, and just know that we do a webinar every month anyway. But that said, we test it. Every time we test, by the way, all the data goes to the cloud. That's not something I've mentioned today, but you get a result on your phone, and actually we get the raw signal up in the cloud as well. And that, I can't see it, by the way, unless you share it with me, so don't worry about privacy. But there we get the raw signal. And it's interesting as well, because there's a little bit of a controversy about this source at the moment. It's made up of greater than 91% Pepper X, made by a guy who's really, scientifically very strong. But it has been analyzed by a third party, and it kind of came out with this kind of score of 61,000 Scoville heat units. It's interesting to see, because in this certificate of analysis, at least they put the method file. They actually said it was, or the methodology. It was ASTA 21.3. On the previous one, they actually didn't even mention what methodology they used. If you're using AOAC and ASTA methodologies, you'll get different results. So it's also been tested on the FoodSense, but on the FoodSense, in order to get the results, we ended up having to do a 1 in 6,000 dilution. And then and all the data goes to the cloud, and we get a raw signal. So 1 in 6,000 dilution. So I just want to compare these things. So Tabasco, we use it. We test on it quite a bit. If we're trying to just verify an instrument or doing quality control, before an instrument's shipped, put a bit of Tabasco on it. It's nice and easy. Get a result. We do a 1 in 10 dilution, and we get the raw signal. So this is literally the raw signal. Death tax is something that we've analyzed. It's hotter. We do a 1 in 100 dilution. By the way, these dilutions, by the way, are prefixed on the machine. You don't have to start guessing what dilution to do. On the Generation 4, it's you just choose, do I do a 1 in 10 or 1 in 100, for example. Anyways, that said, we get the result. And then take this hot sauce. In order to test it, we actually did a 1 in 6,000 dilution. I say that there's a transparency to this device, because you'll get the result on your phone. But the transparency comes from this, this is 1 in 10, and I can look at the raw signal if people want to share it with me and get that kind of, understanding. And I can see it, and I can say, okay, I can see here what the intensity of the signal is. Come to the webinar if you want to understand what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at the raw signal here. And I look at the 1 in 100, and I can look at the signals here, and I can look at the intensity here. So I can see that the intensity here is about 4. The intensity here is about 5, so pretty close. And the intensity here is, again, just over 5. But there's a big difference between these samples. That's diluted 10x. This one's diluted 100x, and this one's diluted 6,000 times. So this result, the 61,000, it just doesn't line up with actually the raw signal. And this is the beautiful thing about the FoodSense, that you will get a result there and then on your phone. But if there's a controversy, like, well, this is milder or hotter than my certificates of analysis. No, we have the data to actually look at this and say, I can tell you what a mild source looks like. A mild source, I do a 1 in 10 dilution. I can look at the raw signal and see the intensity. I can take a medium source, do a 1 in 100 dilution and look at the intensity. I can take a hot source, do a 1 in 6,000 dilution and look at the intensity. And it really allows us to not only give a result on the phone, but also back it up as well. And that's why we talk about transparency, which unfortunately with these certificates of analysis, you don't get any of this kind of raw signal. You just get the number. And sometimes they do tell you the method file, but if they don't tell you the method file, it's literally, you don't even know how they did the test. So there is ASTA 21.3 and there is AOAC 1995.03. It's kind of interesting actually, because you did want me to comment on the alternative methods. Just out of interest, a lot of people, I think the AOAC may, I don't want to be controversial on this, may be the more accurate measurement, accurate method. I think this is the one that the Guinness Book of Records use. But what's interesting about it is actually tops off at 650,000 Scoville heat units. So just know that HPLC officially doesn't really go all the way to all these particularly high SHU levels either. So the alternative, obviously, at ZP, we're extremely biased. We are the developers and manufacturers of the FoodSense Generation 4. This is what the hardware looks like. It's got some really nice features about it. It's super easy to put the sensors in. This is kind of, this is what we call hinged. So I can just kind of click this up and down, and that allows us to put the sensors in quite easily. You see it in the video that's playing at the moment as well, that actually, it's really, unlike the HPLC system, which are, super hard to clean, let's say, when you've got to be careful, because it's a scientific instrument. You can just take this apart, clean it down, and put it back together again. Super nice. I will talk about the work in a minute, that actually you can install this app on your phone, drive the device from Bluetooth. You can do a test in something like 30 seconds. You'll get results on your phone, and it'll also send the results up to the cloud as well, which is protected by your username and password, but it also allows you to then share with somebody like myself, and just, especially when you're a new user, to be able to give you that transparency and understand that the results you're seeing are for real. And the bottom video here is just showing you actually that we can also do chili, ginger, and TAC, total antioxidative capacity. So TAC is, there's a lot of people doing health drinks these days. They talk about the antioxidative properties or the antioxidants in their drinks. There's very little evidence around this, and actually we can actually measure the level of total antioxidant capacity in that juice as well. And that's a little FoodSense. It's got some nice LEDs on the front, which really kind of guide the user experience as well. So you know that the machine is on, it's operating, that it's uploading data, it's made Bluetooth connection, etc. Here's the QR code. I'll slightly, so if you've got an Android phone and you scan that, you'll find that the app is on the Android store. Obviously, this is a video, so you can rewind this later on. The same here is the Apple app. So if you've got an iPhone, you can also use this. And we do have all these QR codes. This is for chili. So this is a multi-analyte system. This is for ginger, and this is for total antioxidative capacity. I know I call it TAS here, but I should have called it TAC. And this is how its system works. So come to one of our demos. There's a live demo on the 20th of February. In that live demo, we take one of our sensors. It's calibration free. Take the meter, we take the app. The app will actually talk to a system called Julie. So you put the sensor into the hardware, you put the sample on the sensor. The app will tell the meter what to do. The meter will run the assay. The meter will give the data back to the app. The app will send the raw signal to the cloud. You will get a result on your phone saying what the Scoville heat units are. And it will also send the data to the cloud. Now, you never have to look at the data in the cloud. You don't have to. But I do actually find that, and I use the word transparency here because I want people to understand that if we say that the Scoville, let's say it was a powder and we say that it's 200,000 Scoville heat units, people say, oh no, but online everything is millions. Well, I'm sorry, but we can actually show you the raw signal. You may have a heterogeneity in your sample, that the sample that you took was particularly high or particularly low. So you have to maybe do a few tests, average them, and do what's called the relative standard deviation, which we do have videos on and we can also teach as well. But, sometimes you have to do averaging because actually your sample is not as homogeneous as that you would otherwise like. And the nice thing about this system, it also allows you to share the data with people like us. We're pretty scientifically strong. We can look at data and make sure everything's working okay. It also has what we call an API, an application program interface. So that allows you to pull across the data into information management systems or laboratory management systems. So some people have quite sophisticated laboratory management systems. They're called LIMS, and our API will allow them to plug into that. Everyone gets personal online training. Everyone has weekly webinars, or we have weekly webinars. This is one of them, and we also do monthly demos as well. So question one, can I install the software on the PC? The answer is no, but you can install it on an Android or an iOS. What is the calibration procedure? As I say, we're coming from this world of diabetes, glucose sensing. You don't see diabetics doing in-field calibration. All the calibration is taken care of by the manufacturer in the original manufacturing process, and that's what we do as well. you asked for a concise but brief explanation of the process. The brief explanation of the process is, this is the meter. It makes Bluetooth connection with an Android phone. You put the sensor in here, you put the sample on the sensor, you run the app, and you will get a result. And at the same time, the results are also always backed up in the cloud as well. You've got alternative methods, HPLC, which is not without its controversy. There's a lot of belief in it, but there's also a lot of, let's say, I'm seeing it online that, people are using multiple labs in order to sort of try and get a sense of what's going on. You've got the Scoville organoleptic testing. This is 112 years old at this point, but nobody's really doing it. And how does our product measure up? Well, you saw earlier on that actually I was showing you results from an HPLC which said that something was 61,000 Scoville heat units, but we were able to compare it against raw signals from other sources, and we absolutely know it's not 61,000 Scoville heat units. The reason I haven't reported what it is I don't want to be pulled into that controversy, but I don't think there actually is a universally. It's very hard to say that the testing that happens in third-party labs today is necessarily accurate and as precise as people would otherwise believe. But the nice thing about the FoodSense is you can do it yourself, you can see the results yourself, and you can sort of, you're not blind to the entire process. So I want to say thank you. If you've got any questions of ZP, don't hesitate to reach out to us, or if you've got questions about FoodSense Generation 4, there is a webinar. I'll put a link underneath the video. The webinar is, I think, on the 28th of February, but just know that we do a webinar every month. So approximately 28th of March, approximately 28th of April, etc. There'll always be a webinar. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.